Many years ago, I worked for the United Parcel Service as part of their morning preload. On the end of the belt where I worked was a union steward named Cameron. The reason why I remember Cameron's name is because of this story. One day they handed out some paperwork, and I can't remember what it was for. I just remember that somewhere on that paperwork there was an opportunity to indicate your race or culture. I'm not sure exactly how they phrased it. And Cameron pointed out, man, how come I have to mark that I'm an African American? Why can't I just mark that I'm an American? I love Cameron. He had my back. I was not a union member. He was a union steward. He did not let that interfere with his opportunity to protect me as a valuable member of the team, my willingness to pay union dues notwithstanding. But it brings to mind the bigger question of this hyphenation that we have, and there are two major problems with it. Number one, notice that the nation of origin is always written first. Italian Americans, African Americans, Armenian Americans, Italian Americans, German Americans. You don't hear that one very much, but and then for my ancestry, it would be Danish Americans. And what people put first in their lives is an indication often of what is the most important. And in this illustration to Cameron's comment, it's why does that have to be the determinant of what I am? Why can't I just be an American? Because most of the people who consider themselves to be African Americans, Italian Americans, many of them have never been to those places. Now, that's not to say there aren't any of people who have been to those places, but they certainly, even if they've been there, did not grow up there. I've spent several years of my life living outside of the United States, but I do not consider myself an Austrian American, as if that would give me some kind of special status anyway. And I have cousins who've lived in Korea or Japan who don't consider themselves to be Sino American, um, because that would be inappropriate. They are what they are, and what we are is Americans. I believe that this is done as a way to wedge us and divide us up and balkanize us into groups. We are all from here. We all grew up here. Most of us were raised here, at least, even if we were born somewhere else. And so our culture and our norms, our beliefs, and our experience is uniquely American. It would be foolish for me to go around claiming that I'm a Danish American as if I have some sort of idea about why my Danish ancestors came here in the first place. In fact, Denmark is probably so different from it was when they left it originally that it is entirely possible that were they alive today, they would elect to remain where they are. So I am no longer that. The second thing is that it um, ignores what we have become and what we are trying to become. In an effort to define us based on who our ancestors were, this is an old feudalism thing where people were determined to be coopers or bootmakers or furriers based on what their father did for a living or what their father believed and lived. Now, I have some Danish traditions that my family observes, but that is not how most of my life is done. I've never been to Denmark. I've never lived in Denmark. I've never actually even seen Denmark. And so it would be foolish for me to presume that I am Danish or that that is what defines me as what I am. But what I can say is that I was born in the United States. I was raised here. I spent a lot of my life here, although I do have some foreign experience. And so I am an American. They like to talk about natives as if somehow I was from somewhere else. This is about our ancestors, and we are not defined by what our ancestors did. We are defined by what we do. Because if you go back far enough in anyone's family tree, there is a monster. And if we're defined by our ancestors, then not one of us has any virtue whatsoever. The notion that we are defined by what we are now when it's convenient and what our ancestors used to be ignores the fact that you don't get to pick your ancestors. You may not even get to pick the land of your nativity. You do get to pick where you decide to live and what you decide to do when you get there. And so the notion that somehow I am colored somehow because of who my ancestors were and that that cannot make me a good person is the same kind of feudalistic and narcissistic and fatalistic argument that has kept mankind from rising for eons. The people who want us to think about natives want us to think about a particular group of people. These same people forced us all in elementary school to sing, "This land is your land, this land is my land." Now they want us to only sing this land is your land. I was born here too. I can show you the street on which I was born. The building in which I was born no longer exists. It's in America. That street was once in Spanish Mexico, and that was probably once part of whatever native empire, if you want to call it. But I'm not a naturalized citizen. I am a native born resident and citizen of the United States. I am a native. I am not from Sweden. I'm not from Denmark. I'm not from Switzerland. What else is there? I'm not from Scotland. I am from the United States of America. I am an American. I happen to have certain ancestry, and I happen to have a certain melanin content by which people are pleased to define me. But the simple fact of the matter is that no matter who your ancestors are, if you were born here by law and by rights, you are an American. If a child can come across the border, be born here, and be imbued with all the rights, powers, privileges, and responsibilities of being an American, why am I considered to be a non-native? They're not. I don't like the hyphens. It's an old way in which old evils and old prejudices are drummed up. It foments hatred and enmity that has persisted for centuries. I was telling the department secretary today about the long-seated hatred between the Germans and the Slavs. The Germans, the Germanic tribes, shall we say, not the Germans of today, were pushed out of Asia by the Slavs, or by the Rus, really. And so for at least 1,100 years, the Germans and the Russians have detested each other. This has nothing to do with their skin color. This has to do with how they live and what they believe to be important. And they have taught their children to continue to hate them. When the Germans went into Russia in World War II, they were sold on the notion that Russians were inferior to them. Of course, the Germans believed everyone was inferior to them, which is how they justify war and atrocity, by dehumanizing others. And when we do not identify what makes us common, we essentially accentuate the things that make us different. The implication then is that different is deficient, but different does not mean deficient, it just means different. And sometimes different is superior. Calling yourself for what you are is important. Calling yourself by your real name, using your real name instead of some avatar or some identifier on the internet is meaningful. Calling a spade is important when you need a spade. Calling a banana is important if you were hoping for a carrot instead. And so calling us what we are is very important. What are we? We are human beings. We are flawed and we are imperfect. For now, we are Americans. And being an American has a unique identity and a unique responsibility to the world. To be a light, to be a source of hope and opportunity. Not because we're going to spread it around by spreading democracy with our armies, or that we want everyone to come and move here. It's about setting a good example of how we live, and teaching correct principles, and letting others govern themselves. If we cannot govern ourselves, how can we expect others to abide by our principles, let alone respect them? Using hyphenations is a form of balkanization. It has been used to divide and divest people for centuries. The whole point of that is to make a group feel like they are alone, like they are powerless, like they are fewer, so that they are easier to defeat. Calling us Italian Americans, Irish Americans, African Americans, Japanese Americans, or whatever you want to do, accentuates the things in which we are different, rather than accentuating the thing in which we are the same. We are all Americans, and that's what really matters. What does that mean to you? And what does that mean that you ought to do about it? And that's some food for thought for you. What does it mean to be an American? And how can you become a better one, regardless of how you have lived and regardless of who your ancestors might happen to be? Remember, you don't pick your ancestors, but you can decide how others, or what there is for others to remember about you. Choose wisely. Godspeed and good luck.